Tax cuts, a balanced budget, and more money for education highlighted Governor Mike Pence's first State of the State address. Indiana's 50th governor gave his remarks in Indianapolis this evening in a speech you could watch right here on WLFI. He called job creation Job 1. He says that government can't create jobs, only government jobs. Instead, it can be fiscally disciplined and create conditions to help others create jobs.
The state of our state is strong and growing stronger because we have good government and because we serve a great people of Indiana. I believe first and foremost our state must live within our means and never spend a single dollar more than it collects.
Joining me now with some expert analysis is Eric Waltenberg from the Purdue Political Science Department. Thanks so much for joining us. What was your take on what you heard tonight?
Well, I thought that Governor Pence, his presentation was quite well practiced and professional. Not terribly surprising about that, given that he's got a lot of experience in politics to begin with. And what we just heard in terms of that soundbite really was one of the, I think, one of the three themes that came out of the State of the State address. You know, one being fiscal responsibility or fiscal discipline, a second one being placing the state sort of on a path towards economic prosperity or economic competitiveness with other states, and then there's a large chunk of the State of the State address that was devoted to education. Not terribly surprising, given that education is really a large part of the state's budget, really. I mean, it's well over 50% of the state's finances go to education. So the fact that he devoted that much attention to it makes a lot of sense.
And he pointed that out. I think he said 64%, which was a large number. I think a lot of people might realize.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's grown over time. For the longest time, a state budget, or excuse me, education was largely locally financed. But over the course of the past decade or so, because of Supreme Court decisions and whatnot, the states, including the state of Indiana, has taken more and more responsibility, sort of equalizing education funding across the state.
And certainly what he ran on was his centerpiece of a 10% tax cut for every Hoosier, which he mentioned tonight as well.
Yeah.
Because we can't afford to cut taxes for every Hoosier, I believe we should. On behalf of millions of hardworking Hoosiers, small businesses and family farms, with the deepest respect, I ask for your support. Let's work together and give the people of Indiana the tax relief they deserve.
Well, Pence said he could have both tax cuts and meet state priorities, and he listed several that are costly, funding full-day kindergarten, putting $350 million for road and infrastructure improvements. Do you think that's realistic?
For a time, it will be, I suppose. You know, a lot of the infrastructure spending will come out of the budget surplus that they have. The question is to whether or not that kind of financing, well, that financing can't be continued. I mean, in a sense, it varies with the degree to which Indiana's economy is prosperous, as opposed to any sort of structural financing programs that would ensure a constant stream of financing. With respect to the other priorities, I mean, in a sense, maintaining fiscal discipline that he called for, in terms of including making sure that the budget didn't increase at a rate greater than inflation, is problematic in terms of also trying to ensure that you get a large tax cut comes along with it. Probably the way it will be affected, should it in fact be put into place, is not so much cutting other programs, but just slowing the rate of growth of those programs.
Okay, well, and one of the things he talked about, I was a little bit surprised by as well, he touched on at the beginning, and again at the end, was unacceptable for 1 in 5 Hoosier children to live in poverty.
But with 22% of our children living in poverty, given the undeniable relationship between childhood poverty and unmarried childbearing, I believe Indiana should seek ways to encourage strong, healthy families for our kids and our communities and our state.
And were you surprised by as much time as he devoted to this and how it all played out?
Not so much the amount of time he spent or devoted with poverty. I was, in a sense, I guess, surprised with the amount of time he spent in terms of the various policies he spoke to with respect to education. In particular, his emphasis on vocational education. But that, in a way, goes back to to the idea that none of these three emphases in his speech were discrete packages, that different types of educational programs could in fact make the state more competitive economically. So vocational training, adult vocational retraining, and the like all could make the state a more attractive place for businesses to locate.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank
Eric
you very much for having me.
joining us. Well, one thing that he didn't talk about was gun control. Pence had prepared some remarks, but dropped them from his address because he was running out of his allotted time. His prepared speech called the Newtown school shooting every parent's worst nightmare, but stated gun control is not the answer. His prepared remarks said, "We will protect our kids and we will protect our rights." Here in